Hello, history dreamers. Tonight, we're diving into a story so strange and captivating, you won't believe it's real. But before we go on this journey through the darkest corners of medieval castles, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because what you're about to hear will take you on a ride through centuries of secrets, sins, and scandals. It was said that in the heart of the medieval world, beyond the forests werewolves howled and moonlight painted, the rivers silver, stood castles that hid stories of kings who were far from noble. These kings, though wrapped in golden cloaks and adorned with shining crowns, harbored desires that were whispered about in fear, desires that turned their kingdoms into places of quiet suffering. The first of these kings, whose name has long been erased from history for fear of shame, ruled over a land where the winters were cruel, and the people survived only through grit and prayer. He was handsome, tall, and carried himself with the grace of a warrior. But behind the walls of his stone fortress, his heart was like a labyrinth of shadows. He had a hunger that no feast could satisfy, a craving not for food or riches, but for control over every soul that crossed his path. His courtiers feared him not because of his sword, but because of the twisted games he played at night. The royal chambers, filled with tapestries of battles and hunts, often echoed with unsettling laughter. Stories whispered through the corridors, carried by servants and guards, telling of women who entered his chambers and never returned the same. Yet, the king was clever. He knew how to mask his nature with kindness during the day, riding through the villages, smiling at children, offering bread to the hungry, to the people. He was a hero, a man who brought stability to a land scarred by war. But at night, when the torches flickered and the cold wind sang through the towers, his true nature emerged. He was like a wolf wearing a crown, waiting for the moment to pounce. In one of these nights, he summoned a minstrel, a young woman known for her voice that could soothe even the fiercest storms. She had no choice but to obey, as she sang, her voice trembling with fear. The king sat in silence, watching her every movement. He did not want her song. He wanted her fear. There was a perverse satisfaction in watching the light in her eyes flicker, as she realized she was trapped in a place where power had no mercy. But fate, as always, had a way of weaving justice into even the darkest tapestries. The king's own advisor, a man who had once been loyal, began to see the cruelty hidden beneath the golden mask. This advisor, who had lost his sister to the king's obsessions, swore to bring him down. However, in a world where the king was seen as divine, bringing such a man to justice was like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. As the story unfolds, we will uncover not just this king, but others like him, men who wore crowns but lost their humanity, men whose desires were so dark, they became legends not for their conquests, but for the scars they left behind. And so, our journey begins. Close your eyes. Let the flicker of candlelight guide you, and listen closely to the whispers of the past. For the medieval world was not just swords and honor, it was also secrets, shadows, and sins. The night after the minstrel's trembling voice echoed through the royal chambers, the castle felt different. The torches that lined the great hall flickered, as though they were whispering secrets among themselves. Outside, the moon hung low and pale, casting ghostly shadows on the stone walls. The king sat on his throne, but his mind was far from the affairs of the kingdom. His thoughts lingered on the fear in the minstrel's eyes, a fear he found strangely intoxicating. The court was silent that evening. No one dared to speak unless spoken to, for the king's temper was as unpredictable as the winds that swept across the mountains. He called for his advisor, Lord Gareth, a man with sharp features and a voice that carried authority. Gareth had served the crown for years, yet every time he stood before the king, a knot of unease tightened in his chest. My lord, Gareth bowed deeply, his voice careful and measured. The people are restless. They whisper of shadows in the castle. Shadows? The king leaned forward, his cold eyes narrowing. Do they not know that shadows exist only where there is light? I am their light, Gareth. Without me, they would be crawling in darkness. Gareth swallowed his words. He had seen too many young women summoned to the castle, too many broken souls leaving behind their laughter and dreams. He had once thought the king was a hero, but now he knew better. The king's hunger was growing. It was no longer enough to command respect. He wanted to own every heartbeat in his kingdom. That same night, the minstrel lay in her small chamber, clutching her lute. She could still feel the king's gaze burning into her memory. It was not admiration, it was possession. Her song had been one of sorrow, a melody that spoke of freedom and love. But in the king's presence, it felt hollow. She wondered how many before her had sung their last tune in that very chamber. A storm began to brew outside. The wind howled as if nature itself protested the sins hidden within the castle walls. The king, however, was unbothered. He stood on the balcony of his chamber, watching the rain streak down like tears on the stone. Fear is power, he whispered to himself, his voice drowned by the storm. And power is what keeps the world bowing at my feet. But Gareth was not alone in his doubts. Among the servants, whispers were spreading. They spoke of the king's nightly summons, of the strange cries heard in the upper halls, of the silence that followed. A young servant girl, Elise, had seen the minstrel leave the king's chamber that night. Her eyes red from tears, her hands trembling. Elise knew she had to do something, even if it meant risking her life. The castle was alive with rumors, each one adding to the growing tension that coiled like a serpent ready to strike. The king sensed it too, but rather than calm the storm, he embraced it. In his twisted mind, fear was the foundation of loyalty. Let them whisper, he said to Gareth with a sly smile. Whispers are just the sound of my name spreading. However, the minstrel was not a girl to be silenced easily. Her heart, though shaken, burned with a quiet defiance. She began to write songs not of sorrow, but of hidden truth verses that spoke of tyranny and the cruelty of power late at night. When the guards slept, she sang to herself in a voice barely above a whisper, as if weaving a spell of courage for the days ahead. In the coming nights, her song would not only reach the ears of the servants but also Gareth's. And in those notes, the seeds of rebellion would begin to grow. Asterisk, the storm raged through the night, its howling winds pressing against the stone walls of the castle as if trying to force their way inside. Morning came, but the sky remained a curtain of gray, with rain falling in steady sheets. Lord Gareth stood in the great hall, watching the water drip from the high windows. The echo of his boots on the cold marble floor was the only sound. The castle felt heavier with every passing day, weighed down by secrets no one dared speak. Aloud, he had spent sleepless hours turning over the king's words from the previous night. Fear is power. Gareth knew this all too well, but he also knew that fear alone could not hold a kingdom together forever. The people's whispers had turned into murmurs, and those murmurs would eventually become roars. Something had to change, or the kingdom would crumble under the shadow of its own ruler. Gareth's thoughts wandered to his sister, Isolde, a name that still ached in his memory. She had been one of the many who had caught the king's eye. Bright and spirited, she had entered the castle with laughter on her lips, only to leave it broken and hollow. She had never spoken of what happened within those gilded chambers, but her silence had screamed louder than words. Gareth had sworn that day he would one day break the king's reign of terror. As he stood there lost in thought, a quiet voice called out from the shadows of the hall. Lord Gareth. It was Elise, the young servant girl. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. She clutched a folded piece of parchment in her trembling hands. What is it, child? Gareth's voice softened, a rare tone of kindness reserved for those he trusted. It's from the minstrel, Elise whispered, glancing around nervously. She says she cannot stay silent any longer. She has written this for you. She extended the parchment, her hands shaking as though she held something forbidden. Gareth took it carefully and unfolded the paper. The words were written in hurried strokes, but their meaning was clear, a song of defiance. The minstrel's verses spoke of a king who ruled through fear, of the pain and suffering hidden beneath the crown's gleam. It was dangerous, but it was also beautiful, like a candle burning in a dark, airless room. She is braver than I imagined, Gareth muttered to himself, though his chest tightened with worry. If the king hears of this, her life will not be her own. Elise looked at him with pleading eyes. Please, my lord. You have power. You can protect her, can't you? Gareth wanted to say yes, but the truth was not so simple. The king's reach was long, and even a whisper of rebellion could lead to heads rolling on the castle steps. Still, something stirred within Gareth's heart. Perhaps it was the memory of Isolde, or perhaps it was the fire he saw in Elise's eyes, the same fire that burned in the minstrel's songs. I will speak to her, Gareth said finally. Tell her to meet me in the old library after sunset. No one goes there anymore. We will find a way. As the day dragged on, the king's mood grew darker. He held court with little patience, snapping at anyone who dared bring him trivial matters. His mind was elsewhere, consumed by a sense of unease he couldn't explain. He had noticed the way the servants looked at him, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room. He sensed the whispers, but couldn't catch their words. By evening, the castle was quiet. Gareth made his way to the old library, a place that had been abandoned for years. Dust covered the shelves, and the air smelled of age and forgotten stories. He lit a single candle, its flame casting long shadows across the room. He did not have to wait long. The minstrel arrived, her hood pulled low over her face, her lute strapped to her back. You called for me, she said, her voice low but steady. There was a defiant glimmer in her eyes that reminded Gareth of his sister. Yes, he replied, gesturing for her to sit. I read your song. Do you understand the danger of such words? I do, she answered without hesitation. But silence is a greater danger. Every night, I sing for a man who wears a crown but has no heart. If I remain silent, I am as much a prisoner as those who have suffered before me. Gareth studied her for a moment, then nodded. You have courage, but courage alone will not stop him. We need more than songs. We need allies. Who would stand against a king? The minstrel asked bitterly. The villagers worship him for the bread he throws at their feet. They do not see what happens in the shadows, not yet, Gareth said, leaning closer. But they will. If we can show them the truth, if we can plant the seed of doubt, even a king can fall. Their conversation stretched deep into the night. The minstrel shared the stories she had heard from other women, tales of fear and sorrow hidden behind closed doors. Gareth listened, each word sharpening his resolve. By the time they parted, a silent oath had been formed between them two. Bring the king's darkness into the light, no matter the cost. But even as they plotted, danger crept closer. One of the king's loyal guards, a man named Ulrich, had overheard snippets of their conversation through the library's cracked door. Ulrich was known for his unwavering loyalty, and his thirst for favor in the king's eyes. As he slipped away into the shadows, a cruel smile played across his lips. By morning, the king would know everything. The minstrel returned to her chamber, unaware that her defiance had been discovered. She sat by the window, staring out at the storm-soaked night, and whispered to herself, the song must be sung, even if it's my last. Her fingers traced the strings of her lute, composing the melody of a revolution yet to come. Meanwhile, Gareth stood alone in the library, the candlelight flickering against his weary face. He knew they were running out of time. The king's paranoia was growing, and once suspicion took root in his mind, no one would be safe. Gareth clenched his fists and made a silent vow. I will not let her suffer as Isolde did. Not again. Outside, the storm subsided, leaving the castle soaked and cold. But within its walls, another storm was brewing, one far more dangerous than the rain or thunder. And it had just begun. The dawn broke with an uneasy stillness. The storm had passed, leaving the castle drenched, its stones glistening under the pale morning light. Yet inside, the air was heavier than ever. Lord Gareth awoke before sunrise, his mind consumed by the words exchanged with the minstrel. He could still hear her voice, not trembling with fear, but sharp with resolve. Her defiance had stirred something inside him, something that had long been buried under years of duty and silence. He dressed quickly and walked through the castle corridors, his boots echoing against the stone. The servants scurried out of his path, heads bowed, avoiding his gaze. Everyone sensed a shift in the air, though no one dared speak of it. Gareth knew the king's paranoia was growing. He had seen the restless way the king paced the throne room the night before, like a predator sniffing for prey. Ulrich, the king's loyal guard, was already awake, his mind turning over the pieces of conversation he had overheard in the library. He had not caught every word, but it was enough to know that Gareth and the minstrel were plotting something dangerous. Ulrich had served the king since boyhood, and his loyalty was carved into him like the scars on his arms. The thought of betrayal, especially from someone as close to the king, as Gareth filled him with righteous fury. By mid-morning, Ulrich stood before the king in the throne room. The king sat with a golden goblet in his hand, swirling wine the color of fresh blood. His crown tilted slightly as if he had slept poorly, though his eyes were sharp and unyielding. "My king," Ulrich said, bowing low, "I have troubling news." The king raised an eyebrow, setting the goblet down with a faint clink. "Speak." "There are whispers, my lord. Whispers of songs and secrets. I believe the minstrel and Lord Gareth have spoken ill of you. Last night, in the old library." The king's face hardened. "Are you certain of this?" Ulrich nodded. "I could not hear everything, but I heard enough to know they plot against you." The minstrel spoke of tyranny, and Gareth. He did not silence her. The silence that followed was chilling. The king leaned back in his throne, his fingers drumming against the armrest. "Gareth?" he murmured, his voice a dangerous whisper. "My most trusted advisor?" He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was cold, sharp, like steel scraping against stone. "Bring them to me," the king commanded, "but do not let them know what you have heard. I want to see if they will confess their sins." Meanwhile, Gareth was unaware of Ulrich's betrayal. He met with Elise in the servants' corridor, hidden from the king's gaze. "Did she write again?" Gareth asked. Elise nodded, handing him another folded parchment. "She says she will not sing for him tonight. She refuses." Gareth unfolded the paper, his heart sinking as he read the words. The minstrel's song was no longer just a quiet protest. It was a challenge. She had written verses that named the king as a shadowed tyrant, a man whose throne was built on fear and broken hearts. "This will get her killed," Gareth muttered under his breath. He folded the parchment and tucked it inside his cloak. "Elise, listen to me carefully. Tell her not to come to the king's chambers tonight. Tell her to stay hidden." Elise's eyes widened. "And if the king calls for her, then I will answer for her," Gareth said, his voice low but firm. "I will find a way to distract him." As dusk approached, the tension in the castle grew thicker. The king's summons came sooner than expected. Gareth was called to the throne room just as the evening bells rang. He entered, his head held high, though his heart was pounding. The king sat there, smiling faintly, as if amused by some private joke. "Gareth," the king said smoothly, "you seem troubled these days. Are my affairs becoming too much for you?" "No, my king," Gareth replied, bowing slightly. "I am as loyal as I have always been." "Loyal?" the king repeated, almost tasting the word. "I hear there are songs being sung, songs with curious words. Do you know anything about them?" Gareth felt his pulse quicken. He knew the king was testing him. "Songs, my lord? The minstrel sings as she always has." "Does she?" The king's smile widened, though his eyes were cold. "Bring her to me tonight. I wish to hear one of these songs." When Gareth left the throne room, his mind was in turmoil. He found Elise and sent her running to the minstrel with a warning. "Do not come," Gareth instructed. "If you value your life, you will stay in your chamber." The minstrel, however, was not easily swayed. "If I hide, I am no better than a caged bird," she told Elise. "I will face him, but not with fear. Tonight, I will sing the truth. That night, the hall was dimly lit with torches, their flames dancing as if sensing the storm about to erupt. The king sat in his grand chair, flanked by Ulrich and 2 other guards. When the minstrel entered, carrying her lute, the room fell. Silent, sing, the king commanded. The minstrel met his gaze, her hands trembling only slightly as she strummed the first notes. Her voice, clear and strong, filled the room. It was a song unlike any she had sung before, a tale of a king who ruled with shadows, who feasted on fear, who wore a crown but had lost his soul. Each word was a dagger, each note a rebellion. The king's smile vanished. His eyes blazed with fury, but he did not stop her. Not yet. When the final note faded, silence swallowed the room. The king rose from his chair, his steps slow but deliberate. "You are brave," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But bravery has a price." Ulrich moved forward, hand on his sword. Gareth, who had been standing near the edge of the hall, stepped between them. "My king," Gareth said, his voice steady though his heart pounded. "She meant no harm. It is only a song. Only a song." The king's laugh was sharp. Songs inspire men to rebellion. Songs topple thrones. In that moment, Gareth knew that the time for silence had passed. If he let the king harm the minstrel, the kingdom would sink further into darkness. He stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his own sword. "If you wish to harm her, you will have to go through me." The hall fell into shocked silence. Ulrich's eyes widened. The king's fury turned to cold amusement. "So, it is true," the king murmured. "Even my closest advisor has turned against me." The grand hall of the castle was silent except for the faint crackle of the torches lining its walls. Every breath seemed to echo, every heartbeat felt heavy, as if the entire room held its breath. Gareth stood between the king and the minstrel, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The king's eyes burned with cold fury, a fire that could turn any man's courage into ash. Yet Gareth did not move. "You dare to stand against me?" The king's voice cut through the silence like a blade. It was not shouted, but the quiet intensity of it was far more dangerous than any scream. "Yo, Gareth, my most trusted advisor. The man I raised from nothing would draw a sword to protect this girl." Gareth's jaw tightened. "Not just to protect her, my king. To protect the soul of this kingdom. We were not meant to rule through fear." The king laughed, a sharp, mirthless sound that made the guards flinch. "Fear is the only thing that keeps people loyal. Bread and kindness are forgotten quickly, but fear lasts forever." The minstrel clutched her lute, her knuckles white. She had never seen such defiance in anyone's eyes, not until Gareth stood before the king. In that moment, she realized something profound. This wasn't just about her song. It was about every soul in the kingdom, trapped under the weight of the king's cruelty. "Ulrich," the king barked, his gaze snapping to the guard. "Take the minstrel. Let her learn what happens to those who challenge their king." Ulrich stepped forward, his armor clinking softly with each step. His hand reached for the minstrel's arm, but before he could touch her, Gareth's sword flashed from its scabbard. The steel gleamed in the torchlight. "Stay your hand, Ulrich," Gareth said, his voice like stone. "I will not let this happen." The tension in the hall tightened, like a bowstring ready to snap. Ulrich hesitated, torn between his loyalty to the king and the quiet respect he had for Gareth. The king's face twisted with rage. "You would defy me, Gareth? You would raise your sword in my hall?" "I swore my loyalty to the crown," Gareth said, his voice steady. "But a crown without honor is nothing but a band of gold. If this is the king you have become, then I cannot serve you." The king's hand curled into a fist. "Then you are no longer my advisor. You are my enemy." The hall erupted into chaos. Ulrich drew his sword, and 2 guards moved to flank Gareth. The minstrel backed away, her breath coming fast and shallow. She had never seen men draw steel for her, and the sight filled her with both terror and awe. "Go," Gareth said to her without looking back. His voice was firm, but there was a softness beneath it. "Find Elise. Get out of the castle. I will hold them here." The minstrel hesitated. "I can't leave you go," Gareth barked, his eyes never leaving Ulrich's. "If you stay, we both die." The minstrel turned and ran, her lute clutched tightly against her chest. Her footsteps echoed down the stone hallways as she disappeared into the shadows. Gareth exhaled slowly, gripping his sword with both hands. Ulrich attacked first, his blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Gareth parried, the clash of metal ringing out like thunder. The guards joined in, but Gareth was quick, his movements sharp and practiced. Years of advising the king had dulled his spirit, but not his skill. With each swing of his sword, Gareth fought not just for survival, but for redemption. Meanwhile, the minstrel raced through the corridors, her heart pounding. She found Elise in the servants' quarters, hiding behind a stack of linens. "We have to go," the minstrel whispered urgently. "Now." Elise's eyes widened. "What happened?" "There's no time to explain," the minstrel said, grabbing her hand. "Gareth is buying us time. We have to leave the castle before the king." A shout echoed down the hall. Guards were already searching for her. Elise and the minstrel fled, darting through narrow passages that wound like veins through the castle's belly. The minstrel's mind raced. Where could they go? The kingdom was vast, but the king's reach was long. Back in the hall, Gareth's strength began to wane. Ulrich was a skilled fighter, and the two guards were relentless. A cut opened across Gareth's arm, warm blood seeping through his sleeve. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, disarming one guard with a swift twist of his blade. The second guard lunged, but Gareth sidestepped and struck him down with the flat of his sword. Ulrich pressed harder, his expression grim. "You can't win, Gareth," he hissed. "The king's will is absolute." "Then I will die knowing I tried," Gareth replied. He blocked another strike, his breath ragged. "But you, Ulrich, you still have a choice. Stand with him, and you will fall with him." For a moment, Ulrich's blade hesitated. A flicker of doubt passed over his face. But then the king's voice roared from behind them. "Finish him, Ulrich. Do not fail me." The hesitation vanished. Ulrich swung again, and Gareth barely deflected the blow. Sparks flew as steel met steel. Gareth stumbled, his back hitting one of the stone pillars. His arms trembled under the weight of the fight, but he refused to yield. The minstrel and Elise reached the outer courtyard. Rain still slicked the cobblestones, making every step treacherous. They ducked behind a cart filled with firewood, catching their breath. "We can't just leave him," Elise said, tears brimming in her eyes. The minstrel looked back toward the castle's looming towers. She could hear faint echoes of clashing steel. Her heart ached, but she knew Gareth's words were true. If they stayed, they would all die. "We'll come back for him," she whispered. "But first, we need to survive." In the hall, Gareth made one final, desperate strike. His blade caught Ulrich's shoulder, sending the guard sprawling. But the effort cost him. He dropped to one knee, his vision swimming. The king rose from his throne, descending the steps. Slowly, his footsteps echoing like a death knell. "You were like a brother to me, Gareth," the king said, his voice cold. "But even brothers must be punished when they forget who is king." Gareth looked up, blood trickling down his face. "You are no king," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "You are a tyrant." The king's face hardened. He raised his hand. "Take him to the dungeons. I will decide his fate at dawn." Two guards seized Gareth, dragging him away. His sword clattered to the ground, the sound ringing through the hall like a funeral bell. Gareth did not resist. His body was weak, but his spirit burned with quiet fire. He had bought the minstrel and Elise enough time to escape. For now, that was enough. The king watched him go, his expression unreadable. "Let this be a warning," he said to the remaining guards. "No one defies the crown outside the castle walls." The minstrel and Elise vanished into the rain-soaked woods, their hearts pounding with fear and hope. The minstrel looked back one last time, the silhouette of the castle towering against the stormy sky. She tightened her grip on her lute and whispered, "This is not the end. The song isn't finished." And somewhere deep in the dungeons, Gareth smiled despite his pain, knowing the fight had only just begun. The dungeon beneath the castle was a place few had seen and lived to speak of. Its walls were carved from rough stone, damp with the breath of centuries. The air was thick with the scent of mold and rusted iron, and the faint drip of water echoed like a distant clock counting down to despair. Gareth lay chained to the wall, his wrists bruised from the iron shackles that dug into his skin. His breathing was shallow, but his spirit burned like a stubborn flame. Every sound in the darkness reminded him of the king's voice, that cold command to throw him here, into the depths of the earth. Gareth closed his eyes, forcing himself to remember Isolde, her laughter, her warmth, and the light that once made the castle a place of hope. That memory was his shield against the shadows. He heard footsteps approaching. The sound was deliberate, slow, each step tapping against the stone like a drumbeat. The torchlight from the hallway spilled into the dungeon, and Ulrich appeared, carrying a tray with a hunk of bread and a small jug of water. His face was expressionless, but his eyes held something Gareth hadn't seen before, a flicker of unease. "You should have stayed loyal," Ulrich said, setting the tray down. "This was not necessary, wasn't it?" Gareth's voice was hoarse but defiant. "Tell me, Ulrich, how many more will you let him destroy? How long will you keep serving a man who rules with fear, who sees his people as pawns?" Ulrich's jaw tightened. "The king is the king. His will is law." "No," Gareth said firmly, his eyes locking onto Ulrich's. "A king without honor is no king at all. You know it. I saw it in your eyes last night when I stood against him." For a moment, Ulrich said nothing. His hand clenched at his side. "You risk everything for a song," he muttered, turning away. "For a girl." "It's not just a song," Gareth said, his voice growing stronger. "It's a voice for all who are too afraid to speak. One day, Ulrich, you'll have to choose serve the crown or serve the people." Ulrich didn't respond. He grabbed the empty tray and left, the heavy door closing with a sound that echoed like a final word. Yet Gareth felt he had planted a seed, however small, in the guard's heart. Meanwhile, in the dense forest beyond the castle walls, the minstrel and Elise were hiding beneath the shelter of an old oak tree. The rain had soaked them to the bone, but they dared not light a fire. The king's men would be searching the roads by now. Elise hugged her knees, her voice trembling. "We left him behind." The minstrel stared into the darkness of the woods, her heart heavy with guilt. "We had no choice," she said softly, "but we will go back. We can't leave Gareth to face this alone." "But how?" Elise asked. We're nothing compared to him." The minstrel's hand tightened on her lute. "A song can be stronger than a sword," she whispered. "If we can reach the people, tell them the truth about the king, they will rise. No tyrant can stand against a kingdom that refuses to kneel." In the castle, the king paced his chamber like a caged beast. The song the minstrel had sung still lingered in his mind, each word gnawing at his pride. He could silence Gareth with the swing of a blade, but the songs had a way of living on, long after voices were silenced. "Find them," the king growled to Ulrich when he returned from the dungeon. "The girl and the servant. I want them back in chains before the moon rises again." Ulrich bowed, but there was hesitation in his movements. "My king, the people are starting to talk. They heard her song. They wonder if it's true." The king's eyes blazed. "Then I will give them a new song, one of fire and fear. I will show them what happens when the crown is defied." Far from the castle, the minstrel and Elise found refuge in a small village at the edge of the forest. The villagers were wary at first, but when the minstrel played her lute that evening by the fire, singing a softened version of her defiant song, the crowd gathered. Her voice told of a land ruled by a man who had forgotten the meaning of mercy, of a kingdom waiting for hope to awaken. An old man approached her after she finished. "Your words," he said, his voice rough with age, "they speak of the truth. We've all felt, but feared to name." The minstrel nodded. "The truth must be heard. The king cannot silence everyone." The villagers whispered among themselves, their eyes burning with quiet anger. Something was stirring and awakening that even the king's iron rule might not withstand. That night, Gareth lay awake in the dungeon, staring at the ceiling. He imagined the minstrel's song reaching the villages, lighting a fire in the hearts of the people. He smiled faintly despite the pain. The chains around his wrists rattled as he shifted. He had done his part by giving her the time to escape. Now, he had to survive long enough to see the storm rise. In the dead of night, Ulrich returned to the dungeon. His armor was gone, replaced with a dark cloak. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, holding a single torch. "Why are you here?" Gareth asked, wary. Ulrich didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the floor, his face shadowed by the torchlight. "The king has lost his way," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I cannot watch this any longer." "You want to help?" Gareth's eyes narrowed. Ulrich nodded once. "But we need a plan. The king will not stop hunting them. He will not stop until the minstrel is silenced." Gareth straightened, his chains clinking. "Then we free the kingdom from his grasp. But first, you must free me." Ulrich hesitated, the keys trembling in his hand. Finally, with a deep breath, he stepped forward and unlocked the shackles. Gareth stumbled but caught himself on the wall. "We don't have much time," Ulrich said. "At dawn, he plans to make an example of you." "Then we must move before dawn," Gareth replied, "and we must find the minstrel." As they slipped through the dungeon's shadows, a new storm gathered over the horizon, rolling clouds of black and silver. It was a fitting omen, Gareth thought, for the rebellion that was about to be born. Asterisk, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the forest in muted shades of gold and gray. Mist clung to the ground, curling like ghostly fingers around the roots of the trees. The minstrel and Elise sat by a quiet brook, their clothes still damp from the storm, their bodies weary, but their minds restless. Neither had slept much through the night. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves had set their hearts pounding with fear that the king's men had found them. The minstrel plucked softly at the strings of her lute, the melody slow and sorrowful. Her voice was a whisper, just enough for Elise to hear. "We cannot hide forever," she murmured between notes. "The king will hunt us, no matter how far we run." Elise hugged her knees, shivering in the cold morning air. "Then what can we do? We're just two women with nothing but a song." The minstrel looked up, her dark eyes burning with quiet determination. "A song can move hearts, Elise. A song can stir people to rise." Gareth believed that, and so do I. She paused, letting the wind carry her words. "But Gareth is still in that dungeon. I won't abandon him." Far beneath the castle, Gareth and Ulrich moved through the shadows of the underground passages. The old guard's face was tense, his jaw set as he led Gareth through a hidden corridor he had once used as a boy. The stone walls were narrow and damp, but they offered a path out of the dungeon. "Why are you helping me?" Gareth asked, his voice low but steady. "Last night, you were ready to strike me down." Ulrich didn't look at him. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I saw the truth in what you said. Maybe I'm tired of watching good people suffer while he sits on that throne and calls himself a king." "You've seen it too," Gareth said softly. "He has no honor left, Ulrich. We must end this before the kingdom falls to ruin." Ulrich's steps slowed, his gaze flicking to Gareth. And this you talk as if we can overthrow him. Not alone, Gareth replied, his voice gaining strength. But the people are waking up. The minstrels' songs are spreading. We can rally them if we can reach them before the king silences her. At that very moment, the king stood in the upper tower of the castle, gazing out over the courtyard below. His anger had not faded overnight. It burned hotter than ever, fueled by Ulrich's failure to bring back the minstrel. He gripped the stone balustrade, his knuckles white. Prepare the riders, he ordered a servant. Scour every village, every forest path. I want the girl alive. Her song ends today. By midday, the minstrel and Elise arrived in a second village, smaller and poorer than the last. The villagers watched them with guarded eyes, but when the minstrel played her lute in the square, a few curious souls gathered. She began to sing, her voice clear despite the exhaustion in her bones. Her song told of chains breaking, of courage rising against the darkness, of a kingdom that could belong to the people again. It was not just music, it was a call to awaken. One by one, the villagers' faces softened, their eyes reflecting something they hadn't felt in years. Hope. An old woman stepped forward, gripping the minstrel's hands. Your words, she said, her voice trembling, they remind me of the days before this king. We were free then, not afraid to speak. The minstrel smiled gently. Then we must remember what freedom feels like. Spread these words. Let the people know they are not alone. That night, as the village slept, Elise noticed a flicker of movement beyond the trees. She rushed to the minstrel's side. Someone's coming. The minstrel grabbed her lute and peered through the darkness. For a moment, fear gripped her heart. But then she saw the familiar figure of a man with dark hair and a cloak. Gareth. The reunion was silent at first, filled with disbelief and relief. Elise threw her arms around Gareth. You escaped. With help, Gareth said, glancing toward the edge of the forest where Ulrich emerged, keeping his head low. Elise tensed, but Gareth raised a hand. He's with us now. The minstrel stepped forward, her eyes scanning Gareth's tired face. You risked everything to free me, she whispered. I won't let it be for nothing. Gareth smiled faintly. Then we do what we planned. We fight back. Round a fire, the four of them spoke in hushed tones, crafting their next move. We need to reach the largest village near the castle, Gareth said. If we can gather enough people, we can challenge the king's rule. But we'll need more than words, we'll need a symbol. The minstrel glanced at her lute. Then let the song be that symbol. Tomorrow, I'll sing in the open square. If they hear my words, they will come. Ulrich frowned. The king's scouts are everywhere. He'll know where you are. Then let him come, Gareth said, his eyes blazing. Let him see that the people no longer kneel. The next day, under a pale sun, the minstrel stood on the steps of the village well, her lute in hand. Villagers gathered, their curiosity turning into quiet anticipation. Gareth and Ulrich stood watch at the edges, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. The minstrel began to play, her fingers gliding over the strings with purpose. Her song rose like the wind sweeping through the crowd. A crown is nothing but gold and lies if it rules with fear and silence cries. But voices rise like fire and flame, and none can stand when freedom calls your name. The crowd grew larger, drawn by the power of her voice. Mothers clutched their children, men exchanged uneasy glances, but all listened. The song was no longer just hers. It belonged to them now. It gave shape to the anger and hope that had long been buried in their hearts from a distance. A scout on horseback watched, his face pale. He turned his horse and galloped back toward the castle. The king would know within hours. That evening, the village square was alive with whispers. Some villagers approached Gareth, offering food and shelter. If what she says is true, one man said, then we'll stand with you. But we are farmers, not fighters. Then your voices will be your weapon, Gareth replied. When the time comes, you will see that courage can be stronger than steel. As night fell, the minstrel sat by the fire, her head resting against her lute. He will come for us, she said softly. Yes, Gareth said, staring into the flames. But this time, we will not run. Far away, in the castle, the king stood before his council. The scout's report still fresh in his ears, his face twisted with fury. Prepare the soldiers, he commanded. We march at dawn. If the people want rebellion, they will drown in their own fire. And so, while the stars wheeled above the silent kingdom, two forces prepared to clash, the iron fist of the king and the fragile, fiery hope of a song that refused to die. Asters, the night passed with a strange, heavy silence, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire in the village square. Gareth barely slept. His eyes stayed fixed on the road that led toward the castle, half expecting to see the king's soldiers riding in, their armor glinting in the moonlight. Beside him, Ulrich sharpened his blade, the scrape of steel against stone rhythmic and steady like the ticking of an unseen clock. The minstrel sat near the fire, her lute cradled against her knees. She strummed softly, the notes weaving a lullaby that soothed the frightened villagers who had gathered close. Elise sat beside her, clutching a rough woolen blanket. Will he come? She asked quietly, her voice trembling. Gareth looked up, his face set like carved stone. Yes, the king will come. Songs travel faster than fire, and he will not allow defiance to spread. The minstrel's fingers paused on the strings. Then we have no time. We must turn these whispers into strength before his shadow falls upon us. At dawn, Gareth gathered the villagers in the square. Men, women, and even children stood before him, their faces pale but determined. You have lived too long in fear, Gareth began, his voice carrying across the still morning. You know what the king has become. You know the chains he places on all of us, chains of silence, chains of cruelty. But today, we break them. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The minstrel stepped forward, her dark hair catching the first light of morning. I will sing for you, she said, her voice clear. Not as a servant of the king, but as a voice of the people. And if he comes for us, we will face him together. The villagers nodded, their eyes brightening with the spark of hope. Some of the men began fashioning crude weapons, axes, hammers, and pitchforks, while others prepared barricades along the village's outer paths. It was not much, but it was something. Meanwhile, in the castle, the king prepared for war. His soldiers lined the courtyard, their armor polished to a cold sheen. Horses snorted and pawed at the ground as black banners bearing the royal crest were raised. The king himself stood atop the steps, his crown glinting in the harsh morning light. Today, the king declared to his men, we remind them who rules this land. A song may charm fools, but iron and fire will silence them all. The soldiers roared their approval, though many of them exchanged uneasy glances. They had heard the minstrel's song too. Even within the castle walls, her voice had found its way, carried by whispers among the servants still. They were bound to the king by oath and feared not by midday. Gareth and Ulrich climbed a hill just outside the village, watching for signs of the approaching army. Ulrich's sharp eyes caught the glint of sunlight on steel far in the distance. They're coming, he said grimly. How many? Gareth asked. Too many, Ulrich replied. At least 200 men. Gareth's heart sank, but he masked his fear. Then we have to make every voice count. We cannot win with blades alone. We must win with fire in their hearts. He turned to the minstrel, who had followed them up the hill. Are you ready? She gripped her lute tightly, nodding. For Gareth, for Isolde, for everyone who has suffered in silence, I am ready. As the army drew closer, Gareth ordered the villagers to gather in the square. The barricades were in place, and men stood ready with their makeshift weapons. Children and the elderly were sent to the far side of the village, away from the main road. The minstrel climbed atop the well, her lute shining in the sunlight like a beacon. When the soldiers appeared at the edge of the village, their armor dark and menacing, the minstrel began to play. Her voice soared, rising above the tension, carrying words that struck deeper than any sword. We are not shadows, we are the flame. We will not bow to fear or shame. A tyrant's crown cannot hold sway when hearts rise strong to face the day. The soldiers paused, their steps faltering as they heard the defiant song. Some looked at one another, unsure. In their eyes, Gareth saw doubt, the very thing they needed. The king rode at the front, his black cloak billowing like storm clouds. His face was a mask of fury as he dismounted, striding toward the square. Enough, he roared, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the houses. This ends now. Hand over the minstrel, or I will burn this village to the ground. No one moved. The villagers stood shoulder to shoulder, their gazes fixed on the king. The minstrel's song did not stop. Her voice only grew louder, a wave crashing against the king's rage. Gareth stepped forward, sword in hand. You will not touch her. The king sneered. Gareth, you dare to stand against me again. After all I gave you, you gave me nothing but chains, Gareth said, his voice cutting through the air. Your crown is soaked in the blood of the innocent. Today, your reign of fear ends. The king laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. You think this rebel can stop me? I am the king. Not anymore, Gareth replied. Not when the people see who you truly are. With a furious shout, the king drew his sword. The clash was swift steel against steel, sparks flying as the two men fought in the center of the square. Gareth's strength was fueled by the villagers' cheers, their belief in him like a shield. Ulrich joined the fray, blocking the soldiers who tried to reach the minstrel. The villagers, emboldened by the song, surged forward. Pitchforks met swords, hammers struck shields. The square became a storm of chaos, but it was not chaos born of fear, it was rebellion. The minstrel's voice never wavered. Even as the battle raged, she sang louder, the melody weaving through the clash of weapons. Rise, my people, rise and see. The power lies in you and me. A crown may fall, a king may break, but freedom's song we will not forsake. The king's blows were heavy and precise, but Gareth's resolve was unshakable. With a final strike, Gareth disarmed him, the king's sword clattering to the cobblestones. The villagers erupted into cheers, but Gareth raised his hand. No, he said, panting. This is not the end. A king should answer to his people. The king looked around, seeing the faces of those he had ruled through fear. There was no loyalty in their eyes now, only defiance. Ulrich stepped forward, holding the king's discarded sword. Your reign is over, he said. If you have any honor left, you will face their judgment. The king's face twisted, but he saw no escape. Slowly, he lowered his head. The battle was won, but Gareth knew the war was not yet over. There were still loyalists, still chains to break across the kingdom. But for the first time, hope filled the air like the sweet scent of spring after a long winter. The minstrel's voice softened as she strummed the final chord of her song. This is just the beginning, she said, her gaze meeting Gareth's. Yes, Gareth replied, gripping her hand. The beginning of freedom. Asterisk asterisk, the village square was littered with the remnants of the battle-broken shields, dropped swords, and splashes of mud darkened with blood. The villagers moved quietly, tending to the wounded and gathering their fallen. Smoke curled gently from smoldering torches, the scent of fire mixing with the metallic tang of steel. The minstrel stood near the old well, her lute cradled in her arms, silent now but resonating with the memory of her song that had carried them to victory. Gareth leaned against a post, his body aching with every breath. His tunic was torn, streaked with blood and grime, but his eyes burned with determination. The king, stripped of his crown and chained by his own soldiers now turned against him, sat slumped on the ground. The weight of defeat hung heavy on his shoulders. "It's over," Elise whispered, standing beside the minstrel. Her voice was soft, filled with both relief and disbelief. "We actually did it." The minstrel shook her head slightly. "This battle is over, yes, but the war for freedom has only begun. The king's loyalists will come. We need to be ready." Gareth approached the former king, crouching down so they were eye to eye. "You ruled with fear," he said, his voice steady. "But look at them now. The people you called weak, they stood up against you. Do you understand now what real power is?" The king's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You think this changes anything? My banners fly across the entire kingdom. For every village you free, there are 10 more that will crush you. Then we'll free them all." Gareth replied firmly, "Even if it takes the rest of our lives." The villagers gathered around, watching silently as Gareth addressed them. His voice carried across the square. "You have shown courage today, more than you know. This village has lit the first flame of freedom. But the fight does not end here. The king's men will come again, and they will come harder. We must stand together not just as villagers, but as a people." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. One of the farmers, a burly man with a thick beard, stepped forward. "We'll fight. We've lived under his shadow too long. You've shown us we can stand." The minstrel looked at the faces around her, faces once filled with fear, now glowing with resolve. She raised her lute and began to strum, her voice rising in a gentle but firm melody. "Through ash and pain, the dawn will rise. With hearts as strong as endless skies, we'll walk the path our songs have made and never bow, nor be afraid." The villagers joined in, humming and singing, their voices blending with hers like a single, unshakable force. The sound rolled over the village like a wave of hope. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Gareth, Ulrich, the minstrel, and Elise gathered by the fire outside the village. The king had been locked away in a wooden cart, guarded by 2 of Ulrich's most trusted men. For now, he was powerless. "We need a plan," Gareth said, breaking the silence. "It's only a matter of time before word spreads. The king's loyal lords will see this as rebellion. We'll be hunted." Ulrich nodded grimly. "We should take the fight to them before they bring it to us. If we can rally more villages, we'll have a chance." The minstrel plucked a quiet tune on her lute. "Songs travel faster than swords. If I can carry the truth to the people, they will rise. But you'll need protection," Gareth added, glancing at her. "The king isn't the only threat. His advisors, his warlords, they'll see you as the spark of all this. They'll want you silenced." The minstrel met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Then I'll keep singing, even if it costs me everything." Night fell fully, the stars glittering above like 1,000 watchful eyes. Elise sat close to the fire, her hands folded in her lap. "What about the king?" she asked softly. "What will we do with him?" Gareth stared into the flames. "We let the people decide. He will face judgment not from a throne, but from Those he's hurt. Ulrich's expression hardened. There's danger in keeping him alive. His men may try to free him. Perhaps, Gareth admitted. But killing him now would make us no better than him. We need to show that justice, not vengeance, is what we fight for. The following morning, Gareth addressed the villagers once more. They gathered in the square, curious and uncertain. The king stood chained, flanked by 2 guards. His once proud figure looked diminished, like a shadow of the man he had been. This man called himself your king, Gareth said, his voice strong and clear. He took your voices, your freedom, and your hope. Today, you have the power to decide his fate. What will you do with it? The villagers exchanged murmurs, some calling for his exile, others whispering of execution. The minstrel raised her hand, silencing the crowd. Let him live, she said. Let him see the kingdom rise without him. That is punishment enough. The decision was made. The king would be kept alive, but sent to the edge of the kingdom, exiled and stripped of all power. He spat at the ground but said nothing, his defeat complete. The villagers watched as he was taken away, a broken man. With the king gone, Gareth and his companions prepared to leave. They needed to carry the spark of rebellion to the next village, to build a movement that would sweep through the kingdom like a rising tide. The minstrel stood beside Gareth as they looked back at the village. One last time. Do you think we can really do this? She asked quietly. Gareth's gaze was steady, his voice firm. We have to, because if we don't, all of this your songs, their courage it will have been for nothing. The minstrel smiled faintly and began to strum her lute again. The melody was soft, a promise carried on the wind. Elise and Ulrich mounted their horses, and together, the 4 of them rode out of the village, leaving behind the first glimmer of hope the kingdom had seen. In years far to the east, in a fortress untouched by rebellion, one of the king's lords received news of his fall. His face darkened as he read the message. So, he muttered, they think they can defy the crown. He turned to his captain. Prepare the army. If the king has fallen, then we will rule in his name. The shadows of war had only begun. Together, the road stretched long and winding before them, lined with ancient trees whose branches reached like silent witnesses to history. Gareth, the minstrel, Elise, and Ulrich rode side by side, their breaths misting in the cool morning air. Behind them, the village faded into the distance, its people left to guard the first flame of rebellion. Ahead, the unknown awaited a kingdom, poised between the shadow of tyranny and the dawn of freedom. The minstrel's lute was strapped across her back, its polished wood glinting faintly in the morning light. She hummed softly as they rode, the melody threading through the quiet like a promise. Gareth glanced at her, his eyes filled with admiration. Your song has done more than any sword could, he said. You've given the people something to believe in. The minstrel smiled faintly. A song alone can't win a war, but maybe it can light the way. Ulrich grunted, adjusting the strap of his armor. The lords will not fall as easily as the king did. They will not be swayed by songs. They will come with steel and fire. Then we'll meet them with courage. Gareth replied, his voice firm. And with the people behind us, as they rode. Elise's thoughts wandered back to the village they had left. She remembered the faces of the villagers, glowing with hope as the minstrel's song filled the square. She had seen men and women who had once bowed their heads in fear now standing taller, ready to fight for their freedom. That memory gave her strength. By midday, they reached the crest of a hill. From there, they could see the valley below, dotted with small farms and cottages. Beyond the valley lay a larger town, one of the strongholds of the king's lords. Smoke rose from its chimneys, but something about it felt tense. as though the town itself was holding its breath. "We'll rest here for the night," Gareth said. "Tomorrow, we speak to the people. If they're willing to join us, we'll have the strength we need." That night, they camped just outside the town, a small fire crackling between them. The minstrel sat cross-legged, tuning her lute, while Ulrich sharpened his blade. Gareth stared into the flames, lost in thought. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore," Gareth said after a long silence. "Every village, every family, they're counting on us now." The minstrel met his gaze. "Then we can't falter, no matter what comes." Elise shifted closer to the fire. "Do you think they'll listen to us? The people here, they will?" Gareth said, "Because deep down, they want the same thing we do. A life without fear. A life where they can raise their children without worrying about a king's greed or cruelty." The next morning, they entered the town. It was larger than the previous village, with stone buildings and a bustling market square. Yet there was a heaviness in the air. Soldiers patrolled the streets, their armor marked with the sigil of Lord Harrow, one of the king's most ruthless allies. The minstrel's eyes hardened as she took in the sight. "He already knows," she whispered to Gareth. "Word of the king's fall has reached them. Then we'll make sure the people hear our side of the story first." Gareth said. In the heart of the town square, the minstrel climbed onto a wooden crate. The soldiers eyed her warily, but she raised her lute and began to play. Her song started softly, weaving through the chatter of the marketplace. "From shadows deep, we find our light. From broken chains, we rise to fight. No crown can hold a soul that's free. The heart of the land beats you and me, one by one." People stopped what they were doing to listen. Farmers, merchants, children, all drawn by her voice. The soldiers shifted uneasily, but even they seemed momentarily spellbound. Gareth stepped forward, his voice clear and strong. "The king has fallen. His tyranny is over, but his lords still cling to power, and they will crush anyone who dares to stand. Will you let them? Or will you rise and take back what is yours?" The crowd murmured, their fear wrestling with hope. A young man stepped forward, his fists clenched. "We've suffered under Harrow's rule for years," he said. "If you'll lead us, we'll stand." The moment was electric. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, turning into cheers. The soldiers backed away, unsure of what to do as the people began to rally around Gareth and the minstrel. It was a spark, the same spark that had ignited the first village. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Gareth and his companion stood on the balcony of a small inn, looking out over the town square now alive with voices. The minstrel's song echoed through the streets, carried by those who had heard and believed. "This is how it begins," Gareth said quietly, "not with a single sword, but with 100 voices, 1,000. Ulrich nodded. "The lords will hear of this soon, and when they come, they'll come in force. Then we'll be ready," Gareth said, "because we'll have the people." Later that night, when the town had grown quiet, the minstrel sat by the window of the inn, gazing up at the stars. Gareth joined her, his presence warm and steady. "You've changed everything," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, we changed it together." There was a pause, filled with the weight of unspoken words. Finally, Gareth reached out and took her hand. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together." The minstrel's lips curved into a small smile. "Together," she echoed. Far to the east, Lord Harrow received word of the growing rebellion. His face darkened, his eyes cold and calculating. "So the people think they can sing their way to freedom," he sneered. "Then I will show them what true power sounds like." He turned to his general. "Summon every soldier we have. Burn their villages, silence their songs. This will end before it begins. But as Harrow's armies prepared to march, Gareth, the minstrel, Elise, and Ulrich continued their journey, their resolve unbroken. They rode from town to town, their numbers growing with every stop. Farmers, blacksmiths, merchants, and shepherds all joining the cause, united by a simple, powerful song. The kingdom, once shrouded in darkness, now flickered with light. A storm was coming, but for the first time, it was not a storm of fear. It was a storm of freedom. As they rode into the night, the minstrel played her lute, her voice carrying into the stars, "We are the fire. We are the flame. We'll build a world and give it a name. No crown, no chain, no shadowed throne can stop the seeds of freedom sown." Gareth looked ahead at the horizon, where the first hints of dawn painted the sky with gold. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly, and with that, their journey toward a new kingdom began. Hey everyone. Thank you so much for following the epic journey of the most perverted kings in medieval history. And more until the very end. Gareth, the minstrel, Elise, and Ulrich's story teaches us that true power doesn't always lie in swords or crowns, but in voices, courage, and the hope that unites people's hearts. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more epic tales like this one. Share this video with your friends who love fantasy and medieval history. Drop a comment below, tell us which chapter touched you the most, or which character you found the most inspiring. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for supporting this channel. See you in the next story, and remember, every story has a lesson. And every lesson can change the world.